Hi everyone, welcome to CCDR Lecture 8, Part 2, where I'll be discussing maladaptation, technological fixes and climate change in dryland areas in India. In this lecture, I will first recap the theory on technological fixes and maladaptation against climate change. Next, I will contextualize dryland farming in India amidst climate change and economic liberalization. Applying the case studies of GM crops and groundwater irrigation in India, I will explore maladaptation. This is explicated further in the case study of Telangana, a state in South India, before discussing policy implications and concluding. In the last lecture, I conceptualized how technological fixes have emerged in recent years to combat climate change, driven by corporate interests. These promise a triple win of economic growth, climate change, adaptation, and saving the environment through commercialization and technological innovation. Improving efficiency of input allocation and requiring fewer resources to achieve higher productivity is the main argument through which these technologies are presented as a solution to climate change without economic trade-offs. The corporate promotion of technologies for climate adaptation in the last 2 decades has been pervasive in its mantra to verify market integration and agricultural intensification via a technological fix to address the climate crisis and rural poverty in smallholder farming in the global south. However, I showed that by narrowly defining terms of success, e.g. pesticides fixing pests or fertilizer increasing land productivity, technical fixes temporarily externalize, displace, and even germinate new problems, presenting compromises, not answers. I found that technological fixes are divorced from power relations, socio-economic and agroecological realities of their adoption, overlooking who controls the technologies and how they are inserted into a social and economic system and regime of accumulation. The lack of consideration of technological fixes to the social, economic, and agroecological conditions of technology adoption by smallholder farmers highlights this ideological blind spot in emphasizing technology over all else to the detriment of real-world outcomes. This led to the concept of maladaptation, which is the result of an intentional adaptation policy or measure directly increasing vulnerability for the targeted and/or external actors, and/or eroding preconditions for sustainable development by indirectly increasing society's vulnerability. Adaptation interventions geared towards short-term ends can be ephemeral in nature, creating new problems down the line in the long term. Technologies themselves can worsen climate change, creating maladaptation in the lack of consideration for the power relations and social and economic structures, such as step relations, that perpetuate environmental degradation and poverty in dryland settings. Maladaptation can therefore be a result of obscuring the underlying social drivers of climate change and the politics of who benefits from the adaptation and the trade-offs in doing so. Maladaptation may not initially be adverse, but can develop over time, so should be seen as a process along a continuum that considers timeframes and the inherent contradictions between climate change existing within an optimistic development goal that can create lock-in effects and exacerbate vulnerability. Indian agriculture is dominated by rain-fed agriculture, which limits the growing season to the monsoon from June to September. Semi-arid and arid areas make up to 53% of India's geographic area and support 400 million people, which is also where 40% of the rural poverty is concentrated. 58% of India's cultivated area is rain-fed. India and China make up half of 4 billion people that live in conditions of severe water scarcity for at least 1 month per year, according to the IPCC. In dryland areas, groundwater supplied 60% of irrigation and drinking water in the last few decades. However, 66% of the groundwater area in India is in hard rock aquifer areas, shown in purple. This features low rainfall recharge, high rates of rainfall runoff, and intermittent availability of water in the rock substrata, requiring multiple drill attempts to access groundwater in an aquifer. For aquifers and groundwater levels to be replenished, The monsoon is a crucial source of base flow, making up 67% of total aquifer recharge. In semi-arid areas, however, rainfall is erratic and laterite soil types dominate, which are characterized by poor infiltration capacity. Rainfall variability, climate shocks, and higher temperatures are predicted to reduce rice production by 10 to 30% and maize production by 25 to 70% under a 4-degree scenario by 2100. In India, the frequency of floods tripled between 1950 and 2012, as well as the severity and occurrences of drought events. For example, 8 out of 15 years from 2002 to 2017 were drought years in India. Extreme weather events are predicted to affect 25 million farmers in India through yield losses and harvest failures, with India ranking 7th globally in vulnerability to climate change. 37% of the total land area in India is affected by environmental degradation, including 25% from desertification from factors such as excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides, over-tillage and mechanization of soils, and poor irrigation management. BT cotton, a pest-resistant GM cotton variety, is a key biotechnology that was introduced by Monsanto in USA in 1995. The crop has been positioned as a technical triumph of capital accumulation while saving the environment through reduced pesticide use and its ability to thrive under climate change in a difficult growing environment. As Tokol et al. Explain, BT cotton is able to control targeted pests, thus requiring less pesticide application to the crop. Under a warmer climate, pests tend to respond positively to rising temperatures via faster population growth and dispersal over a geographical area, and a slower die-off rate in milder winters. Likewise, rainfall variability also negatively affects crop development through moisture stress, particularly in the early stages of the growth cycle. For this reason, Huang and Hao posit that BT cotton is an ideal crop for climate change due to its inbuilt pest resistance, reducing risks for farmers from crop losses. Moreover, in rain-fed settings, Narayanamurthy et al. Find that BT cotton required less pesticides and exhibited less crop damage, which increased productivity compared to non-GM cotton. Liberalization reforms in the agricultural sector and India's entry into the WTO in the 1990s. BT cotton rapidly spread across India through the entry and competition via a decentralized network of private sector seed firms, promoting, marketing and selling BT cotton in interlocked factor markets directly to farmers in thousands of towns of India. Market intermediaries offering cheap credit to finance the high capital and input intensive crop and high market prices meant BT cotton covered 95% of India's cotton area across 10 states in under 2 decades, providing smallholder classes with access to the advanced environment-saving and climate-resilient GM technology for capital accumulation in just under 2 decades. BT cotton propelled India to become the biggest producer of cotton in the world, grown by 7 million farmers in India across 12 million hectares. For its proponent, the willingness of millions of Dryland smallholder farmers to adopt BT cotton was proof of their agency through taking on high capital and debt risks in exchange for higher profits amidst a limited set of other alternatives. This is a field of BT cotton in Telangana, South Indian state in India. Tube wells are a technologically advanced form of groundwater irrigation that relies on a submersible pump system that draws water from hundreds of feet underground, powered by electricity or diesel supplies through PVC pipes. Tube well irrigation took off in Dryland, India since the 1990s via the entry of decentralized price competition between irrigation firms that sold pumps and pipes, drilled for groundwater, and provided irrigation extension. Price competition drove down tube well prices from $10,000 to $1,000 between the 1970s and 2000s, in addition to informal credit making tube wells accessible for smallholder farmers without adequate collateral. Shah et al. Estimated that groundwater irrigated economy was $55 to $60 billion per year in 2010, 70% of total irrigated agricultural output. Between 1990 and 2015, 90% of total irrigated area created in India was by groundwater, helping to grow 49% of the rice and 72% of the wheat grown in India. This privatized and decentralized groundwater revolution has created more irrigated area at 33 million hectares in the 50 years since 1970 than centralized public canal investments from dams managed since 1830, spread over 20 million wells in India, of which 87% are owned by smallholder farmers. This was also supported by a public subsidy for electricity usage for groundwater, as 85% of the 20 million wells in India are powered by electricity. Electricity subsidies for groundwater increased by 16 times between 1980 and 2018, rising to $18 billion per year. On the left is a picture of a tube well with the pipes watering a field. On the right is the submersible pump that extracts water from underground aquifers. In this lecture, I will explore BT cotton and tube well irrigation adoption in dryland smallholder environments in the state of Telangana. Telangana was a historically rain-fed and marginal subsistence farming environment, featuring an unstable semi-arid climate and low-yielding hard rock aquifers. As late as 1988, only 25% of Telangana's cultivated area was irrigated, less than 5% from tube wells. Most of Telangana is comprised of hard rock aquifers, which makes it expensive to drill for groundwater irrigation and has low aquifer storage capacity, deemed unsuitable for intensive groundwater development as early as the 1960s. Transformed by liberalization, smallholder intensification progressed rapidly since the 1990s, as Telangana's rain-fed lands were watered by tube well irrigation, increasing economic growth and being dominated by rice and cash crop BT cotton. By 2018, tube wells became the biggest irrigation source in Telangana, contributing to 57% of the total irrigated area at 1.2 million hectares, of which 87% is owned by smallholder farmers. In the 1990s, Telangana was at the forefront of agricultural liberalization in India, referred to by The Economist in 2000 as the state that would reform India. Liberalization of credit, irrigation and input sectors, and the explicit promotion of biotechnology by the Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu also brought a private sector-driven commercialization of smallholder farming by BT cotton, becoming the third biggest state by area in 2 decades. As Bowles describes, biotechnology was a key technological fix in dryland in Telangana. Regarding biotechnology, Naidu has said, "I want the state to be #1 in biotech. That is our goal. I think we are marching ahead." The state has adopted a development plan, Vision 2020, which includes an outline of the state's long-term plans and goals for biotechnology and for agriculture. Vision 2020 calls for the state to become a powerhouse of Indian agriculture, as agriculture itself becomes more productive, efficient, and technology intensive, and moves from a subsistence activity to an economic one. Finally, in irrigation, to aid groundwater expansion, the Telangana government since 2018 expanded free 24/7 electricity for groundwater, the first to do so in India. For my fieldwork, I studied one village in Telangana called Kuchimanchi in Nalgonda district in South Telangana between January and July 2019. The main crops in the district was rice and BT cotton. I conducted 94 interviews with farmers, input firms, and irrigation companies, and carried out 151 household surveys in the village. Kuchimanchi is a typical semi-arid and hard rock aquifer village in Nalgonda district, South Telangana, reflected by the dominance of rice, BT cotton, and tube wells after transforming from subsistence crops in the 2000s. Kuchimanchi has a semi-arid and drought-prone climate, with 69% of annual rainfall falling in the monsoon between June and October. The village received approximately 460 millimeters of rainfall during the monsoon in 2019. 100% of the farmers grew BT cotton, rain-fed as their cash crop, and per capita income per day is $1.20, under the international extreme poverty line of $1.90 per person per day. It has a low 19% adult literacy rate, and an average landholding is only 3 acres. Annual incomes at just over $2,000. Farmers largely rely on agriculture, but also agricultural and construction labor in the dry season. In Kuchimanchu, farmers began adopting BT cotton in the early 2000s, soon after its approval in India. Local input dealers in nearby towns began to market and sell BT cotton seeds, which spread via word of mouth in the village. In under 2 decades, BT cotton increased cotton adoption in Kuchimanchu from 0 to 100% across all castes, classes, and gender categories. Furthermore, 85% of the 105 farming households in the village planted BT cotton as a monocrop. For smallholder farmers in Telangana, BT cotton was a cash crop that could survive high temperatures in semi-arid conditions, acting as the perfect adaptation tool against climate change. BT cotton's positive returns in Kuchimanchu, however, stopped after 5 years of planting, with farmers finding that monsoon variability and declining rainfall over the years made harvest failures more common. As shown by the table, household surveys that conducted in 2018 indicated that 65% of farmers across all categories of class, caste, and gender made a loss from BT cotton. BT cotton was a short-term fix that lasted 5 years as it was unable to sustain yields in a climatically extreme setting. It entered subsistence dryland environments through the lure of cheap credit and high market prices through intermediaries. Yet, in promising a triple win of mitigating climate change, increasing productivity, and reducing environmental degradation, it managed none of the specified goals, instead causing maladaptation and worsening farmer outcomes through the lack of consideration to the economic and agroecological conditions of adoption for its success. By creating an imaginary of technology helping adaptation against climate change without economic trade-offs, it was the technology itself that perpetuated maladaptation and losses by farmers, adversely intensifying in a semi-arid climate. The expectation of a good monsoon in Kuchimanchu used to be a regular occurrence during subsistence agriculture, but with cotton, it was a hit and miss. Farmers interviewed felt that monsoons were worsening with increasing frequency in the last 5 years. Good BT cotton yields depended on at least 500 millimeters of rainfall in the monsoon season over 4 months through from June to October, which is higher than the 460 millimeters Kuchimanchu received in 2019. Most farmers were unable to afford the cost of BT cotton investments, so purchased seeds, fertilizer, and pesticides on credit from input dealers. At the end of the harvest season, farmers sold their cotton harvest at a fixed price to the input dealer, plus 24 to 36% annual interest rate, charged on top of the repayment. Profits made net of these costs could be used for household expenditure, reinvestment, or savings. In recent years, however, BT cotton crop harvests increasingly failed because of erratic monsoons. These erratic conditions force farmers to extend loans for another year from input dealers, hoping that next year's harvest repaid all the cumulative debts for the farmer. As the golden harvest has increasingly not arrived, farmers have become ingrained in debt relations with input dealers each time a BT cotton crop fails. The long-term beneficiaries of these relations are market intermediaries and biotechnology firms, rather than farmers adapting against climate change, whose interests are explained by Gunderson et al. As to wrest control of the choices from the farmers, forcing them into a farming process that uses a package of inputs of maximum value to the producers of those inputs. GM technological fixes are packaged into an input and capital-intensive monocrop market commodity for the benefit of corporate capital. The combination of agroecology, climate, debt, and market intermediaries made BT cotton a failed technological fix in the long term in Kuchimanchu, as GM technologies were adopted in a decontextualized manner to this semi-arid and rain-fed village faced by climate change. Instead of increasing outcomes and saving the environment, BT cotton forced farmers away from the farm to pay for the losses induced from a technology that was supposed to thrive under climate change, not induce further environmental distress, far from what corporate-driven technological fixed narratives predicted. Prior to tube wells, Kuchimanchu was largely a rain-fed village, with farmers growing sorghum, millets, or castor in the monsoon. A reduction in irrigation costs via market competition between tube well firms, rural electrification, and availability of credit allowed smallholder farmers to install tube wells. By 2019, tube wells were adopted by 69 out of 105 households, from 0 households in 2000. Within 5 years, however, tube wells failed persistently for farmers across all castes, classes, and genders, with only 10 households in 2019 having enough water in the tube well to grow rice successfully until the harvest. In total, 215 tube wells were drilled since 2000, but only 24 worked as of 2019, an 89% failure rate. Tube wells also became the most common source of debt for farmers in Cuchimanchi, with 29% of farmers citing it as their biggest debt at $2,207. The table shows how tube well irrigation failed across all categories of class, caste, and gender of households that adopted it for the year 2018. In Cuchimanchi, the rapid adoption of tube well irrigation increased the density of tube wells. The total number of wells drilled in Cuchimanchi since 2000 were 215, spread across 69 households. Groundwater reserves were quickly depleted before they could recharge from monsoon. The low storage and poor recharge capability of laterite soils exacerbated the demand on aquifers from tube well densities increasing. The more farmers drilled wells and extracted water from the same aquifer, the more competition increased among smallholder farmers. Smallholder rain-fed farmers adopted a double-crop system of rain-fed BT cotton in the monsoon and groundwater-irrigated rice in the dry season. This left BT cotton to be grown rain-fed and tube wells to irrigate household rice in the dry season, leading to indebtedness from using both technologies in an unoptimal way. Through their reliance on profit-driven intermediaries, farmers became locked into unviable practices of trying to grow dry season rice via tube wells, facing acute confrontation from debt repayment demands on household finances from creditors. Via their dual roles as extension advisors and salesperson, tube well firms prioritize profitability via maximizing tube well sales, rather than advising farmers to use tube wells to irrigate BT cotton. This left their BT cotton cash crop rain-fed, facing low yields and harvest failures under erratic monsoons. Installing a tube well cost up to $1,500 and an additional $400 to $600 for each new well drilled. On average, a farmer in Cuchimanchi made just over $2,000 annually before all expenses, so tube wells cost 75% of household incomes. The price of failure and cumulative debt from moneylenders at 36% interest rate per year increased economic desperation for farmers, trapping them into debt relations with creditors, just like with commercial crops. Large parts of Telangana and Nalgonda districts have also experienced declining groundwater levels in the last decade, as shown by the diagram in red. Factors such as climate change in Telangana are set to decrease monsoon rainfall by 5 to 10% between 2030 and 2060, which is significant because rainfall makes up 67% of the recharge of aquifers in India. Free electricity schemes for groundwater accelerated adoption and expansion of irrigated cash crop agriculture in Telangana, but depleted aquifers due to the zero marginal cost of extraction of groundwater. This race to the bottom for finite groundwater depleted aquifers quickly after the monsoon as the density of tube wells in the village increased and free electricity incentivized farmers to run submersible pumps for multiple hours per day in the search of water. Perversely, however, the greenhouse gas emissions from electricity for tube wells powered by coal and other non-renewable resources contributes to 11% of total greenhouse gas emissions in India alone, a clear sign of maladaptation. This presents a perverse feedback loop where subsidies increase electricity's consumption, increasing greenhouse gases, which exacerbate rainfall variability in the monsoon and reduces both the total quantity of rainfall in the season, as well as reducing groundwater recharge to replenish ground aquifers in the first place. This means that electricity subsidies potentially reinforce the depletion of tube wells and rain-fed BT cotton outcomes in the future too, if the current system persists. India is on track to face potentially irreversible groundwater depletion by 2025 of 60% of its aquifers if current groundwater extraction rates continue, underlining the impending problems of climate change and its role to worsen BT cotton and tube well outcomes. Debts from BT cotton and tube wells were the single highest debt source for 47% of farming households in Cuchimanchi, at an average debt of $2,200. Considering the repeated failures over 2 decades, a mixture of fear, apprehension, and resigned fatalism drained farmers of any confidence in tube wells working again. Varsity summarizes the pursuit of technological fixes for climate change in India, stating, "The hegemony of this productivity, economic growth, high technology spectrum, that is the focus of all recent major agricultural and rural policies, has several implications for the viability of India's agriculture, the sustainability of its ecological base, and the social basis of rural life. Using productivity as the key trope for agricultural, rural, and economic development of the nation has meant the promotion of dominant external input and capital-based forms of agriculture, which defy the established agroecological patterns of India's agriculture. Agriculture has become, subsequent to such technological interventions, an extractive economy failing to ensure either ecological sustainability or economic viability." In this lecture, I showed how Dryland's farmers in India faced a constellation of socio-ecological, political, and economic drivers that exacerbate farmer vulnerability against climate change. In the case study of Telangana, the rain-fed and semi-arid state transformed into a BT cotton and tube well-dominated commercial smallholder state within just 2 decades, since 2000. Yet I found that in the long term, BT cotton harvest failures and aquifer depletion saw yields worsen and indebtedness increase as private intermediaries and governments accelerated adverse agricultural commercialization, driving maladaptation against climate change. BT cotton and tube wells were put forward as technological fixes to overcome the climatic and geological limits of dryland landscapes and expand spaces for new capital accumulation amidst climate adaptation. Everyday interactions with the climate and development are inherently laden with political, economic, and cultural choices that unravel in complex ways, in creating the scenario we have seen in Dryland, India, with tube wells and BT cotton. Foregrounded within imaginaries of technological fixes as answers to climate adaptation, the flows of groundwater into the hostile rural drylands and flowering of BT cotton buds have eventually dried up, creating indebtedness, maladaptation, and livelihood insecurity. Therefore, this presentation illustrates the futility of applying decontextualized technological fixes and causing dried up economic and socio-ecological realities. Nonetheless, the ideological fixation with technological fixes, such as economic growth for climate adaptation, persists, as evidenced by recent climate resilient and climate smart farming initiatives by the World Bank, which remain under a development frame, demonstrating the universality of the corporate narratives regardless of the outcomes. Yet this also opens up opportunities for agency and envision new forms of responses against climate change that extricate themselves from dominant capitalist narratives. Thank you for listening.